Okay, as we shift to North America, we're actually going to look at more contemporary work here, starting with John Quick to See Smith, Trade, parentheses, gifts for trading land with white people. The artist did this as a response to the 500th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Americas that was acknowledged in 1992. The Smith is from the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes of the Flathead Indian Nation, and created this large mixed media canvas that we see here. It references the role of trade goods in allegorical stories, like the acquisition of the island of Manhattan by Dutch colonists in 1626 from unnamed Native Americans in exchange for goods worth about 60 guilders, or what would be $24 today. These stories are more apocryphal than true, but they've become part of American lore, suggesting that Native Americans have been lured off their land by inexpensive trade goods. And Smith stated that if trade could speak, it might say, "Why wouldn't you consider trading the land we've handed over to you for these silly trinkets that so honor us? Sound like a bad deal? Well, that's the deal you gave us." We have layered images, paint, objects on the surface of the canvas, suggesting layers of history and complexity. We have elements of collage on the canvas itself, newspaper articles about native life cut out from her tribal paper Charcusta. We see photos, comic books, tobacco and gum wrappers, fruit carton labels, ads, pages from comic books, all of which feature stereotypical images of Native Americans. And then we see photos of deer, buffalo, and Native men in historic dress that she has also incorporated into this collage surface. Here on that detail, I think we can see some of these elements a little bit clearer. The final layer, she paints an outline of an almost life-size canoe. And the canoe suggests the possibility of trade and cultural connections. Though this canoe is stuck, it's unable to move. Above the canvas, then, we see this clothesline with a variety of native-themed toys and souvenirs, especially from sports teams with those stereotypical harmful Native American mascots. We have toy tomahawks, a children's headdress, Red Man chewing tobacco, a Washington Redskins cap, Florida State Seminoles bumper sticker, Cleveland Indian pennant and cap, Atlanta Braves license plate, the list goes on. And these items are reminders of how Native life has been commodified, not to help Native people, but instead for outsiders to make money off of these images, turning Native cultural objects into cheap items sold without a true understanding of the original meaning and context. Her work ultimately, I think, creates a dialogue between art and its viewers, exploring issues of Native identity as it is seen by both Native Americans and non-Native Americans as well. All right, let's look at this codex. I think this is so interesting because we've already learned a little bit about the long history of the book. And here we have performance artist Guillermo Gomez Peña, visual artist Enrique Chagoya, and book artist Felicia Rice. They collaborated to create the Codex Expangliensis in 2001, a kind of contemporary take on these historical codices that explain the history of the Americas. This work is printed on a model paper, which is the traditional medium of Mesoamerican manuscripts and books, and the language of the text is mixed: Spanish, English, and the Aztec language Nahua, spelled Nahutl. The narrative includes characters from the history of the Americas like Moctezuma or Hernan Cortez, but it also includes people like Mickey Mouse and Superman to take the reader on a journey through the struggles of the Chicano experience. Now, Chicano is a term that gains in popularity in the United States in the 60s and 70s. It's used to describe people of Mexican origin living in the United States. And the Chicano movement really began as a civil rights movement that had multiple aims, including the rights of farm workers and better educational access. Here we see Diego Luna, who also confronts issues of identity and stereotypes of Native peoples. We're looking at his work called Artifact Piece on the left, in which he places himself in a glass vitrine, like the ones we see in museums, as if he was a static artifact, a relic of the past. And he accompanies himself with personal items like pictures of his family. In Take a Picture with a Real Indian, here we see Luna on Columbus Day in Washington, D.C. He asks his audience to come take a picture with me, and he changes his clothes 3 times. We see little cardboard cutouts of the different outfits he wears. So a loincloth with a feather and bone breastplate, and then what we might just call street clothes. What's interesting is that most people chose to take a picture with him in the loincloth or the loincloth and breastplate. In these choices, Luna draws our attention to the problematic idea that somehow he is less authentically Native when dressed in contemporary clothes like jeans and a t-shirt, or the idea that maybe Native culture is something that is dead and only relegated to the past. All right, I want to focus on the Northwest Coast because this is the focus of our reading. And there are many different groups that we see labeled here. You are going to hear about, in the reading here, you're going to see the focus on Tlingit culture. And let's see, can I quick spot this on the map? Yes, I can. So up here, right here on the coast of Alaska. Again, it's so hard to generalize here, but we can talk about a few things. Animals feature prominently. Each clan claims descent from a mythic animal ancestor. We also see some typical formal elements like kind of oval shapes or slightly bent rectangles with rounded corners. And we also see a lot of continuous shape-defining lines. So one line we can trace through an entire composition. Let's look at this bird mask. Willie Seaweed, his name Seaweed is an anglicization of Siwid, S-I-W-I-D, which means paddling canoe or paddled to, and that refers to a great chief, somebody who is paddled to. He doesn't have to paddle to others. And in fact, Seaweed is a great chief of his clan. He's also an orator, singer, and tribal historian, and he keeps the tradition of potlatch alive, especially during times of government repression. Potlatch, or Ku-X, K-U, period E-X-X, means invitation in Tlingit. And this is, potlatch has been, these are, include objects that are brought up for these ritual occasions, these ritual potlatch occasions. The objects, the artworks that are used are called at-o, A-T period O-O-W, and you'll read about that in the article. Potlatch was a ritual, it was a festival that was actually banned in Canada in 1884. There were there were First Nation peoples in Canada who were actually imprisoned for practicing potlatch. This was not deleted from Canadian law until 1951. This mask is part of potlatch. It's meant for a masked performance at a potlatch ritual ceremony associated with Hamatsa, or the cannibal society. This is a privilege that stemmed from an ancestral encounter with deadly cannibal spirits. Typically, a chief gave the cannibal dance to his son-in-law for the benefit of future grandsons. And like most masked dances of the Northwest, they took place in winter. This is when cannibal spirits journeyed south from the north end of the world to different villages. And the performances enact the kidnapping of the initiate by cannibal spirits and his return. And upon his return, he's transformed into a cannibal himself. Now, the chiefs of the family can cure the dancer and purge him of the cannibal spirit. This is really what we see here. We think of performance art as being something very modern and contemporary in the art world, but performance art using theater, dance, mask, movement, audience interaction, this is something that has been long embedded in Native cultures in the Americas, and it's really significant. It's gone overlooked because it doesn't fit into these kind of restricted categories of painting, sculpture, architecture that we tend to use in the West. Now, this bird mask here shows us some of those typical stylistic features, those long continuous lines that outline forms, the rounded ovoid rectangular forms, and then we also see the kind of scroll here of the upper and lower jaws. Very, very dramatic. All right, here is a blanket that Tlingit women from the Chilkat River region wove to form line designs into patterns of different types in these wool blankets. This is an important tradition to carry on, and it was women of the Chilkat Tlingit nation that became the sole carriers of this tradition by the 19th century. It's collaborative work, though, because women weave the patterns that are designed by men. And these blankets are so important because they can be transported. They travel far from the origin community through trade. And we see how that allows information to be shared. The chiefs of southern communities coveted them for what was known as the chief's dance. This is a demonstration of power in which a chief, hosting a potlatch, danced with a Chilkat blanket, a headdress, and a raven rattle to summon masked dancers representing power spirits into the dance house. And so again, we see how an art object is activated through performance and dance, and also really the coming together of community as well. I posted these questions on the Canvas discussion post, but I wanted to review them here with you all. I want you to first understand who the author is. Nora Marks Dauenhauer is a Tlingit poet and writer. She's a Tlingit language scholar, and so she's not an art historian in the traditional sense, but she is deeply invested in preserving Tlingit traditions, and that includes visual culture, of course. I want you to also think about how this reading differs from previous readings. What does Dauenhauer tell us about the difference between a native and a non-native point of view? How do we define ot'u? I think I might have pronounced that wrong, but at.oow, ot'u. And how does ot'u differ from artworks found in other cultures? And then finally, what are some challenges in contemporary Tlingit society that Dauenhauer mentions to us? All right, that wraps things up just in the nick of time. Screencast-O-Matic is going to kick me off here in a second. Have a great week, everybody. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns. I am here.